Welcome to Royal World Podcast, exploring the history, legacy, and influence of global nobility. Discover more full documentaries on our YouTube channel and TV.
A king can lose a country and still keep the crown's shadow. One died like a regular man after dinner. One was banished in silk gloves. One family fought over jewels locked into a vault. One left his country and was never allowed to return to the story. This isn't about thrones, it's about what comes after. The exile. The reinvention. And the slow death of relevance. Because the crown comes off, but the world never forgets who wore it. What is a king when he becomes just a name on a guest list? A monarchy doesn't collapse in a single night. It collapses in the space of what people endure and what they refuse to endure anymore. In 1952, Egypt reached that moment, and King Farooq became the symbol of what had to go. By the early 1950s, Farooq's rule was widely criticized for corruption and for Egypt's failure in the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Two accusations that hit the same nerve: humiliation. And when a country is angry, it doesn't write footnotes, it picks a face.
In 1951, he married his second wife, Nariman Sadek, who came from a commoner background, and he thought that this wedding might help him curry some public favor. However, even though the wedding might have helped his popularity, they had a luxurious honeymoon in which they gallivanted around Europe for 3 months, and this certainly didn't help with the optics of his reign. When the army stormed Kube Palace, they found an absolute treasure trove of expensive trinkets and even pornography. There were Fabergé eggs. There was a lot of things that truly showed that he was a exuberant and wasteful man, that although he had ascended to the throne as a teenager, had not changed much since.
Farooq's public image, his indulgence, his excess, the palace's distance from ordinary life made him that face. Inside the armed forces, resentment hardened into something organized. A group of officers, later known as the Free Officers, presented themselves as a purge against thieves and traitors, framing the old order as rotten. This wasn't just one scandal or one bad decision. It was a broader verdict. The monarchy had become the problem. And then came the ultimatum, delivered not by diplomats, but by men with tanks. The coup began on July the 23rd, 1952. Within days, Farooq was forced to abdicate in favor of his infant son, Ahmed Fuad. So the crown passed on paper to a baby. But the monarchy was already bleeding out. Farooq left Egypt and went into exile. Here's where most stories end. But for Farooq, exile wasn't the epilogue, it was the main act. In exile, the world shrinks. Not because you're poor, Farooq still had money and connections, but because your life loses its engine. Authority. Without a court to manage him, Farooq became a man living in the echo of himself. The same tastes, the same habits, but no nation attached to them anymore. But then exile does what exile always does. It turns into routine, until routine turns into reputation.
For King Farooq, he might have not seen the end of his regime come if he hadn't already alienated himself from the networks that were supposed to give him this power. He was in a tricky position as head of Egypt. He had the Muslim Brotherhood and other Arabic countries to please. And then he also had the USA and the UK with a very heavy eye on him. And to appease both, also prevent interference in the country's internal affairs was a tricky situation. However, the loss of the army support truly sealed his fate. It was relatively gradual. It began by brokering of arm deals that did not work, and then when the war against Israel came and Egypt did not perform very positively, the army started seeing him not just as an inept ruler, rather as an actively problematic one. He might have been used as a powerful puppet for a shadow government if he had been more useful. In fact, the CIA might have been planning to do this. They had an operation in which it has been revealed they might have had the plan to make him into some sort of puppet.
By 1965, Farooq had been out of Egypt for more than a decade. And on March the 18th, 1965 in Rome, he collapsed after a late dinner. He was taken to hospital and died minutes later, apparently of a heart attack. He was 45, a man who once embodied the state, gone in a moment that felt almost ordinary. That's the final irony. Royal power ends loudly, but royal exile often ends quietly. King Farooq's story shows the first rule of life after the crown. You don't just lose a throne, you lose the structure that made you make sense. Before he became the Duke of Windsor, he was the most famous heir in the world. Edward was the eldest son of King George V, raised for duty, trained for ceremony, and shaped to inherit an empire. As Prince of Wales, he was modern, charismatic, and relentlessly photographed. More celebrity than crown, even before social media existed. After the passing of his father, Edward became king. and less than a year later, he abdicated for love. Turning one of the most powerful institutions on earth into a personal crisis. He didn't lose the crown, he returned it. Not because he was defeated, but because he chose a life the monarchy refused to make room for.
Abdication is not often a choice that royals take willingly. The few English monarchs that did abdicate before, such as Richard II and James II, and even Mary Queen of Scots, they did so because they were forced to do so. However, his abdication made him look very bad, because some members of the press and even the royal family tried to paint this whole affair as a labor of love that made him exit his powerful position in order to be with the woman that he was so enamored with. But Wallis Simpson was not likable enough for the British public to be considered a profitable romantic heroine. She was seen as domineering, she was seen as promiscuous, and this made the king look both weak and not particularly smart and very keen to betray his own country. It was seen as a move that he took towards the USA and to other ideologies that Wallis Simpson held that the UK public was not in agreement of.
Against all odds, the monarchy and his future, he married Wallis Simpson in 1937 in France. They would live abroad for much of their lives, especially in France, moving through a social world that looked more glamorous on camera and hollow in private. Because the price of giving up the crown wasn't poverty, it was being kept at arm's length by the very institution he used to embody. When Wallis became the Duchess of Windsor, one decision set the tone for everything that followed. King George VI confirmed that the Duke could keep the style Royal Highness, but his wife would not be entitled to it. From that point on, their life isn't just abroad. It's a kind of royal quarantine, glamorous, expensive, and never fully forgiven. In July 1940, Edward was appointed governor of the Bahamas. Publicly, it was a service. Privately, it was distance. A wartime solution designed to get him out of Europe, out of reach, out of conversation, out of trouble. Because by then, suspicion clung to him. His 1937 visit to Germany and meeting with Hitler, the whispers about where his sympathies leaned, and the fear that he could become, willing or not, a magnet for intrigue. Years later, Churchill himself described the logic in blunt strategic terms, telling the US president that moving the Duke to the Bahamas was part of strenuous efforts to get him away from Europe beyond the reach of the enemy. When the war ended, Edward and Wallis didn't return to anything. They went back to what exile had become for them: Paris, elegant, curated, and safely away from the centre of British life. From the outside, it was a perfect photograph. Dinner parties, couture, society friends. And transatlantic trips that made their life look like freedom. But freedom isn't the same as belonging. and the Windsors were famous everywhere, while still feeling unofficial everywhere. They visited the United States repeatedly, moved through high society, and lived in a world where the past was always present, because everyone in the room knew what Edward used to be. And then there was the one thing exile does best. It turns time into a mirror. Edward watched the monarchy continue without him. New reign, new era, new faces. While his own identity stayed pinned to one moment in 1936. So he did what many exiled royals eventually do. He tried to take control of the narrative. In 1951, he published his memoir, A King's Story, laying out his vision of events and justifying the abdication on his own terms. It wasn't just a book, it was a declaration. I'm still the author of my own life. But a memoir can't rebuild a court. It can't restore the structure that made him make sense. It can only remind the world what he gave up and what the institution refused to bend for. On May the 18th, 1972, during her state visit to France, Queen Elizabeth II visited Edward and Wallis in Paris 10 days before his death. A reigning queen sitting with the uncle who once wore the crown. History condensed into a room. Edward died in his villa in 1972 of throat cancer. His body was flown back to Britain. On June the 5th, 1972, St George's Chapel at Windsor filled with the full weight of royal ritual, hymns, uniforms, and the kind of ceremony that makes personal drama look like national history. And then there was Wallis. She arrived from Paris and stayed at Buckingham Palace, a detail that still feels surreal, considering how long she had lived outside the royal world. Inside the chapel, she was seated beside Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, close enough to the crown to touch it, after decades of being kept at a distance. The Queen Mother met her only once during the visit, on the day of the funeral, brief, formal, heavy with everything that didn't need to be said out loud. After the service, Edward was buried at the Royal Burial Ground at Frogmore near Windsor. Later, Wallis would be buried beside him. At Windsor, the ritual was perfect. Hymns, uniforms, history. That's the truth of the Duke of Windsor. The monarchy could bury him as family, but it never truly welcomed him as one. The fall of Italy's monarchy didn't end with a revolution. It ended with paperwork. In 1946, Italians voted to become a republic. And the House of Savoy was pushed into exile. But this exile was different. It wasn't temporary, and it wasn't informal. It was written into the Constitution. And when a family is banned by law, even coming home doesn't mean getting your kingdom back. Sometimes it just means reopening old wounds and old faults. The House of Savoy is one of Europe's oldest dynasties. emerging in the Alpine region of Savoy around the turn of the 11th century, with Humbert, often called Humbert the White-Handed, named as its founder. Over centuries, they grew from regional counts into rulers whose name became inseparable from Italy's national story. By the 19th century, the Savoys didn't just rule territory, they helped assemble a country. In 1861, Victor Emmanuel II became the first king of a unified Italy. And for a time, it worked. A royal house that could say with some credibility, "Italy exists in this shape because we held it together." But history never lets a dynasty pick only the flattering chapters. After World War II, the Savoy name carried an association that proved fatal. The memory of the monarchy's role during the fascist era, especially under Victor Emmanuel III, and a country desperate to reinvent itself. In June 1946, Italians voted in a referendum to abolish the monarchy. The last king, Umberto II, later remembered as the King of May for his brief reign, left Italy and began an exile that would last the rest of his life. And then came the legal hammer. Italy's constitutional, transitory and final provisions included a ban that specifically targeted the Savoys, especially the male line, preventing their entry and, for years, even their political participation. The Savoy exile didn't look like one neat story. It splintered by generation, by marriage, by geography. Victor Emmanuel III abdicated and left Italy, going into exile in Alexandria, Egypt, where he died in 1947. Umberto II built his exile around Portugal's Riviera in Casais, part of a broader European ecosystem of displaced royalty. And elsewhere, the family recalibrated around Switzerland, particularly Geneva, where a younger generation grew up at a distance from Italy, building private lives that were royal in surname, but civilian in routine. For more than half a century, the ban held. And then, in 2002, Italy lifted the effects of key parts of that constitutional provision, opening the door to the Savoy men returning. But this wasn't a restoration. It was a re-entry under strict reality. And once the exile ended legally, another battle began over who the Savoys even were now. Even after returning, the House of Savoy couldn't present a single unified face. In recent years, the family's internal leadership had been publicly contested. Emanuele Filiberto, son of Vittorio Emanuele, has positioned himself as the modern public figure of the dynasty, and he has openly pushed the idea of modernizing succession, announcing that his daughter, Princess Vittoria, should inherit the leadership role, challenging traditional male preference expectations associated with dynastic rules. Meanwhile, the Aosta branch, represented today by Aemon of Savoy-Aosta, has been part of a long-running dispute over dynastic legitimacy, fueled by arguments about whether Vittorio Emanuele's marriage lacked the required consent under house rules. This is what exile does to dynasties. It doesn't just remove the throne, it removes the referee. The Savoy afterlife wasn't lived in quiet dignity alone. It was shaped by headlines. Vittorio Emanuele's later life included public controversies and legal trouble, episodes that made the family's relationship with Italy even more complicated. In the 21st century, Emanuele Filiberto took a very different approach, not hiding from the public, but trying to win it, leaning into media, visibility, and even celebrity culture. And then there's the object that turns this story from politics into pure symbolism, the crown jewels. Not a crown on a velvet cushion. Italy doesn't do coronations anymore. But a collection of roughly 26 pieces, sitting in darkness like a national secret. Tiaras, brooches, necklaces, ornate, meticulous, almost theatrical. And inside those pieces, over 6,000 diamonds and around 2,000 pearls. A fortune, yes, but more importantly, a ghost of monarchy still sitting in a vault. They've been locked in a Bank of Italy vault in Rome since June the 5th, 1946, just days after Italians voted to abolish the monarchy, and right before the Savoy's world officially ended. Decades later, the jewels became a legal battleground. In 2022, Savoy heirs launched a formal attempt to reclaim them. And in 2025, a court in Rome rejected the bid, affirming the jewels remain property of the Italian state. So the jewels stay sealed, thousands of diamonds the public rarely sees, held not by a king, not by a family, but by the Republic itself. And for the Savoys, that vault is more than a safe deposit box. It's the final door that still won't open, a reminder that exile doesn't end when you're allowed to come back. In 2024, Vittorio Emanuele, son of Italy's last king, died in Geneva, closing one more link to the old monarchy. And what remains is the strangest form of a royal survival. A family without a throne, still negotiating titles, legacy and relevance, sometimes in courts, sometimes in interviews, sometimes in the marketplace of attention. The House of Savoy shows what happens when exile is constitutional, when your return depends on the state forgiving your surname. There's a special kind of exile reserved for living legends. The one where you're not banished by law, you're managed by silence. Juan Carlos I once stood at the center of Spain's modern story. Today, he lives thousands of kilometers away in Abu Dhabi, while the institution he rebuilt acts as if his name is a liability that must be kept off the guest list. Juan Carlos didn't inherit a normal throne. He was selected by dictator Francisco Franco as successor. And when Franco died in 1975, Juan Carlos became king. But the version of Juan Carlos that Spain celebrated for decades was defined by one major choice. He helped steer the country away from dictatorship and toward parliamentary democracy. In the late 1970s, Spain moved through a transition that produced democratic elections in 1977. And in 1981, when a coup attempt shook the country, Juan Carlos's televised intervention became a defining moment of his image as a guarantor of the constitutional order, an episode that cemented the idea of the king who saved democracy. For years, that reputation wasn't just popularity, it was protection. Because in a monarchy, legitimacy isn't only inherited, it's constantly re-earned. And then, Spain changed. The monarchy didn't fall overnight. It corroded, slowly, under a new kind of scrutiny. By the early 2010s, the climate was different. Economic pain, institutional fatigue, and a public less willing to accept private life as a royal privilege. Then came the image that did real damage. The 2012 Botswana elephant hunting trip. Luxury, secrecy, and a crisis of optics that landed like an insult during hard times. And behind the optics, more serious questions grew louder. Money, foundations, undeclared gifts, and relationships that blurred the line between private life and national reputation. There were also reports that Juan Carlos received a $100 million donation linked to Saudi Arabia's late King Abdullah in 2008, which became part of the broader controversy investigated by prosecutors.
The foundations, the undeclared gifts, and the commissions were all investigated, but they did not come without some personal scandal. Tied to all these issues was the extramarital affair that Juan Carlos was having with Corina Larsen, who had allegedly actually received some money that had been gifted to the king, unbeknownst to the Spanish public. And they really did have more of a problem with those money issues. Thanks to Spain's constitution, the royal family has access to political, economical, and symbolic power. And to see them take advantage of this power that they were given by the public, it was a betrayal not just of their position, but of the people themselves, the people that they were supposed to be loyal to.
In the 21st century, a monarchy can survive scandal, but not a scandal that threatens the institution's legitimacy as clean governance. In 2014, Juan Carlos abdicated in favor of his son Felipe. If Juan Carlos's reign was built on being the face of national reconciliation, his retirement became the opposite, the institution separating itself from him. In March 2020, King Felipe VI publicly renounced any personal inheritance from his father and withdrew Juan Carlos's royal stipend, moves widely interpreted as a firewall to protect the crown from the financial scandal. And then, in August 2020, Juan Carlos announced he would leave Spain, citing the public repercussions of past events in his private life and the desire to facilitate Felipe's work as head of state. That exit wasn't presented as punishment, it was presented as a necessity. The most striking part, Spain didn't officially exile him. He did it himself, and still, it looks and feels like exile. Since 2020, Juan Carlos has lived in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. In 2022, Spain's royal household published a communique referencing Juan Carlos's letter, stating he would maintain his permanent and stable residence there. This is royal exile in the modern age. Not a shack, not a prison, but a quiet, controlled life where your old country is always present and your new country is never truly yours. Juan Carlos has made occasional visits back to Spain, often framed as private or leisure trips, but his public role remains limited and carefully managed. So the man who once personified Spain's state continuity now appears in fragments, a brief arrival, a controlled photograph, a quick departure. The royal family has kept its distance over the years. Juan Carlos has described publicly feeling abandoned by King Felipe VI, understanding his son's duty as monarchy but grieving the emotional distance as a father. So, in 2025, Juan Carlos made a move that exiled royals make when silence becomes unbearable. He tried to reclaim the story in his own words. He announced and released memoirs titled Reconciliation, published first in France with a Spanish edition planned afterward. The memoir is part confession, part grievance, part self-portrait. It revisits moments of personal trauma, like his account of the accidental death of his younger brother Alfonso, while also returning to the claim that he gave Spain what mattered most, a path to democracy. And behind every page, you can feel the real audience he's writing to. Not historians, not critics, but the institution itself. Because in the end, a memoir isn't a pardon, it's a negotiation. This is the afterlife of power. You don't disappear, you're edited. A former king reduced to selected frames, managed distance, and a story everyone argues over, except the man living it. Four stories, four exits, and the same ending in different clothes. Farooq shows what happens when power disappears overnight, when the machine stops and the man is left alone with his appetites. Edward shows the other kind of fall, the one you choose, only to learn that choosing exile doesn't mean escaping consequence. The House of Savoy proves exile can be written into law, and even when the law changes, the damage doesn't rewind. The throne doesn't come back, only the arguments do. And Juan Carlos shows the modern version. Not chains, not walls, just distance, silence, and a country that keeps you in the frame only when it's convenient. Because the crown is never just a crown. It's a system that turns a person into a symbol and then punishes them when they can't stay symbolic. This is the afterlife of power. You don't disappear, you're rewritten.